In a packed courtroom filled with tension and anticipation, Judge Greg Mathis sat tall behind his bench, eyes sharp and ready. The case had attracted widespread attention, not just because of its political implications, but because Jasmine Crockett, a rising firebrand in Congress, was taking the stand not as a witness or a representative, but as the defendant. Accusations had been swirling for weeks about a supposed misuse of campaign funds, though Crockett had repeatedly denied wrongdoing. What made the moment so explosive was the clear sense that Judge Mathis wasn't approaching this with his usual sense of humor or fairness. From the opening remarks, it was obvious that he had a plan to outwit, outmaneuver, and ultimately humiliate the fiery Congresswoman in front of a national audience. But what Mathis didn't anticipate was just how razor-sharp Crockett's intellect was and how masterfully she could turn even the most precarious situations to her advantage. As the trial kicked off, Judge Mathis began with what appeared to be simple questions, background, timelines, the usual, but the rhythm of his tone suggested more. Every few moments, he'd drop in leading questions, seemingly harmless but structured to frame Crockett in a way that leaned toward guilt. Observers, who had watched Mathis for years, noted the shift. He wasn't just adjudicating, he was playing chess. Yet Crockett sat steady, her eyes unwavering, her posture regal. When she spoke, her words came with clarity and precision. "I respect this court," she began, "but I will not allow baseless allegations to define my public service," the audience murmured. Mathis leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. He fired off a question about a transaction labeled consulting on her financial disclosure forms. Crockett responded with receipts, both literally and figuratively, explaining in detail the purpose, timeline, and regulatory compliance of every cent. It was the first sign that this trial would not go the way Mathis hoped. Things took a sharper turn when Mathis introduced what he called new evidence, emails between Crockett's campaign team and a lobbying firm. He claimed they hinted at a quid pro quo. The courtroom tensed. Crockett asked to read the documents aloud. Mathis hesitated, then allowed it. She began reading line by line, her voice calm but commanding, pointing out that none of the emails were from her, nor did they contain any direct promises. She then produced her own chain of emails, time-stamped and verified, showing that she had, in fact, rejected the lobbyist's offers and insisted on transparency. Mathis shifted in his seat. "Are you implying the court has been misled?" he asked with irritation. Crockett didn't flinch. "I'm stating that selective interpretation of incomplete information isn't justice," she replied. The courtroom burst into muffled gasps, and even the stenographer paused, eyebrows raised. For the first time, Mathis looked like he was on the defensive. Mathis tried again. This time, he asked a line of hypothetical questions, designed to corner Crockett into admitting negligence. "If someone in your campaign used funds improperly, would you consider yourself responsible?" he asked. Crockett nodded but clarified. "As a leader, I take responsibility for the integrity of my team. But I also believe in evidence, not assumptions." Mathis followed up rapidly, hoping to confuse her into a contradiction. But Crockett anticipated each move, responding not just with facts but with legal citations and ethics codes. The court reporter was typing furiously, struggling to keep up. Several members of the gallery were seen nodding, even clapping quietly before being silenced by the bailiff. Crockett was no longer just defending herself, she was dismantling the prosecution's narrative piece by piece, like a lawyer exposing the flaws of a poorly built case. And all while maintaining her composure and showing respect to the court, even as it clearly sought to entrap her. Midway through the proceedings, Crockett requested permission to call an unexpected witness, C, former campaign staffer, who had remained silent until now. Mathis appeared reluctant, but had no legal basis to deny the request. When the staffer took the stand, he provided a signed affidavit and verbal testimony that cleared up every allegation about financial mismanagement. Not only did he confirm Crockett's ethical standards, but he also revealed that certain leaks to the press had been orchestrated by a political rival. The gallery erupted. Apith Bavis banged his gavel, calling for order, but the damage to his line of questioning was done. Crockett stood and addressed the court. "This trial is no longer just about my campaign. It's It's about weaponizing our legal systems to silence strong voices. I won't be silenced. Mathis tried to interrupt, but his voice was drowned out by the spontaneous applause from the audience. The bailiff had to intervene again. But even that didn't erase the sense that the courtroom tide had shifted permanently. With his strategy unraveling, Mathis pivoted to demeanor. He accused Crockett of being hostile and combative, implying that her tone undermined her credibility. Crockett leaned forward, looking directly at him. "Let me be clear," she said. "Being assertive is not hostility. Asking questions is not aggression. And demanding fairness is not insubordination." They've then cited a string of court cases where women, particularly black women, had been described as difficult simply for refusing to be passive. The air grew heavy. Mathis appeared shaken, caught between maintaining authority and realizing the optics of his behavior. The jury, watching carefully, began to take notes more frequently, their faces now more skeptical of the judge than of the defendant. Even the prosecution seemed less confident, whispering nervously among themselves. Crockett had not just defended herself, she was leading a silent revolution against courtroom bias. And Mathis was inadvertently giving her the platform to do so. Then came the moment that would define the entire trial. Mathis asked one final, pointed question. "Can you look this court in the eye and say you never intended to gain personally from your position?" It was a dramatic flourish, clearly meant to serve as his gotcha moment. Crockett stood up slowly. "I'll do better than that," she said. She pulled out a folder filled with financial statements, donation logs, and public service records. Each document demonstrated not only legal compliance, but personal sacrifice. She highlighted how she had declined raises, donated portions of her salary, and created initiatives for underserved communities without fanfare. "Public service for me is not a career, it's a responsibility," she said. "I didn't come here to get rich. I came to make a difference." The room was dead silent. Even Mathis seemed unsure of what to say next. The balance of power in the courtroom had shifted entirely. It wasn't his domain anymore. Crockett had taken over without ever raising her voice. As the defense rested, the jury seemed visibly moved. Several jurors nodded when Crockett finished speaking, and others avoided eye contact with Mathis entirely. The prosecution offered a weak closing argument, relying mostly on speculation and insinuation. But it was clear that the narrative had collapsed. When Crockett delivered her closing remarks, she didn't speak just for herself. She spoke for every person who had ever been unfairly scrutinized, second-guessed, or misjudged because they dared to be unapologetically bold in spaces that feared boldness. "Truth isn't loud or subtle, it's undeniable," she concluded. The judge's instructions to the jury were terse and rushed. For someone who had tried to control every detail of the trial, Mathis now seemed eager to wrap it up. And when the jury retired for deliberation, it was clear they had already made up their minds. It took them less than an hour to return with a verdict, not guilty on all counts. As the clerk read the verdict, Crockett didn't gloat. She stood tall, nodded in respect, and turned to thank her legal team and the supporters in the courtroom. But the cameras didn't focus on her at least not immediately. Yes. They turned to Judge Mathis, whose expression flickered between disbelief and disappointment. He had walked into the trial thinking he'd trap a rising star, embarrass her, and perhaps even humble her into silence. Instead, he had been methodically outwitted and exposed not just as a judge with an agenda, but as someone who underestimated the very essence of resilience. Crockett had flipped the entire trial, not just by defending herself, but by rewriting the entire narrative in real time. And she had done it with facts, dignity, and a voice so commanding that not even a judge's gavel could drown it out. As the crowd exited the courtroom, whispers turned into chants of support. Outside, people held signs, not in protest, but in solidarity. Later that evening, in a post-trial interview, Crockett was asked how she had stayed so composed. "I've been underestimated my whole life," she said. "I'm used to walking into rooms where people have already made decisions about me. But I've also learned how to change their minds with truth, with poise, and with power." The interviewer asked if she had any message for Judge Mathis. She smiled. "I respect the bench," she replied. But respect isn't the same as submission. The clip went viral. Across social media, hashtags like Crockett Strong and Truth and Trial began trending. Legal analysts weighed in, calling the trial a masterclass in courtroom defense and public accountability. And while Judge Mathis remained silent in the days that followed, the message was clear. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just walked out of the courtroom vindicated, she had walked out victorious. A symbol of strength in the face of institutional challenge. And she did it on her terms, with her voice,